Good evening. I'm delighted to welcome you to the 2019 National Preservation Awards. The National Preservation Awards celebrate the best of the best in preservation. Over the next hour, you will see images and hear stories of some truly impressive sites and will witness stunning transformations. And while we all love to see an old building restored to its original glory, the real stars of these awards are the people behind the projects. The people we are honoring tonight all showed remarkable vision and determination, and through their work, they've helped expand narratives in preservation and breathe new life into their communities. In recent years, we presented awards throughout the week of the conference. However, many of you told us that you missed this event, as did I. It's a time of pure It's a time of pure celebration and inspiration. And we hope that this evening's ceremony will encourage you to head back to your community to tackle whatever preservation challenge you may face. Tonight, we will be presenting awards for outstanding achievement in stewardship, organizational excellence, and public policy. We will honor 4 individual projects, 1 through the National Trust President's Award, and 3 through the Richard Driehaus Foundation's National Preservation Awards. And finally, we'll present the Louise DuPont Crowninshield Award, preservation's highest honor. The work we are honoring tonight represents a broad range of preservation work being done across the country. But as diverse as these recipients are, each project, organization, and individual recognized here demonstrates the transformational power of our movement. Now, I'd like to call Steve Turner from History Colorado to the stage to present tonight's first award.
Good evening. As the State Historic Preservation Officer for Colorado, I want to start by saying I hope that you have had a really good and productive time here in Colorado. I also want to say that I'm particularly happy that you were able to be here for 3 seasons in the last 72 hours. I invite you to come back again sometime. Tip O'Neill, to paraphrase Tip O'Neill, all preservation is local. And I can tell you as the State Historic Preservation Officer, what we do absolutely would not be possible without all of the hard work of all of the local citywide as well as statewide historic preservation organizations. Each year, through its Trustees Award for Organizational Excellence, the National Trust recognizes a nonprofit organization that has demonstrated sustained and superlative achievement in historic preservation. This year, I'm very pleased that the National Trust is honoring Colorado's very own Historic Denver.
For nearly 5 decades, Historic Denver Incorporated has been the leading preservation organization in the city of Denver. The organization was founded in 1970 as part of a significant public effort to save the home of Titanic survivor Margaret "Molly" Brown. The organization acquired and restored the property, and today, the Molly Brown House Museum serves 55,000 visitors each year through tours, educational programs, outreach, and exhibits. Working closely with the public and local officials to address the challenges of a developing city, Historic Denver has been the driving force behind many vital preservation wins throughout the city. The economic success following the designation of the Lower Downtown Historic District has become a catalyst for numerous additional residential and commercial districts in the area. Recently, the organization has worked to enhance Colorado's state tax credit and continues to lead efforts to protect Larimer Square, Denver's first historic district. Historic Denver is known to many as a resource for the community. Through technical assistance, funding, and educational tools, they empower the public to advocate for Denver's historic identity.
A warm, very warm half a day from the island of Guam. Historic sites are vital to both our movement and our nation's history. Through its Trustees Emeritus Award for Historic Site Stewardship, the National Trust recognizes success and innovation in historic preservation, management, and programming at historic sites. This year's recipient, Taliesin Preservation, is keeping the spirit of Frank Lloyd Wright's alive at the 800-acre estate in Wisconsin.
Taliesin Preservation was founded in 1993 with the mission of preserving Frank Lloyd Wright's home, studio, school, farm, and 800-acre estate, Taliesin, located near Spring Green, Wisconsin. The group achieves this by conducting educational and cultural programming, as well as providing preservation resources, funding, and specialized preservation staffing. The National Historic Landmark and UNESCO World Heritage Site, owned by the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation, is comprised of various structures that were built between 1896 and 1953, representing nearly every decade of Wright's career. For the past 25 years, Taliesin Preservation has overseen the preservation, programming, and tour program at Taliesin and has contributed over $10 million to preservation projects across the site. In addition to preserving the buildings, the group preserves the agricultural fields and natural areas at the estate. Taliesin Preservation's ability to balance historic landscapes, history, preservation, and community engagement ensures that the site is sustainable and will continue to be preserved and interpreted in the years to come.
Thank you very much. The John H. Chafee Trustees Award for Outstanding Achievement in Public Policy recognizes individuals who've done excellent work in preservation advocacy. Tonight, we honor two longtime allies in the Senate, Senator Lamar Alexander of Tennessee and Senator Tom Udall of New Mexico, both of whom are retiring in 2020.
Senator Lamar Alexander's leadership on park and public land issues has had an enduring impact on historic resources in Tennessee and the nation. A strong advocate to fully fund the Land and Water Conservation Fund, he also works to tackle the maintenance backlog of our national parks. Alexander has also sponsored legislation that celebrates African American heritage, including the African American Civil Rights Network and the Julius Rosenwald and Rosenwald Schools Study Act. Senator Tom Udall is a leader on both the Interior Appropriations Subcommittee and the Indian Affairs Committee, where he has demonstrated great support on many park and public lands issues. He has championed efforts to protect the landscape around Chaco Culture National Historical Park and the defense of designated monuments, including Bears Ears National Monument. His leadership has had a lasting impact on historic resources in New Mexico and the nation.
Unfortunately, Senators Alexander and Udall could not be with us this evening, but Senator Alexander has prepared the following remarks for us tonight.
Good evening. I'm grateful for this award, but really, I should be thanking you for the work you do to help protect and preserve our nation's historic lands and buildings. For 70 years, the National Trust for Historic Preservation has worked to save America's historic places so that future generations can enjoy them and learn from them as we have. There are countless examples of the great work that the Trust has done to preserve our places and our history, but I'd like to talk about one Tennessee example. In 2018, the National Trust designated the Claiborne Temple in Memphis as a national treasure and is working with the National Park Service and others to restore the temple. The Claiborne Temple was the epicenter of the 1960s civil rights movement in Memphis. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered the organizing speech and led a march from Claiborne Temple to City Hall during the 1968 Memphis sanitation workers' strike. Few American cities played as important a role in the civil rights movement as Memphis has. The work to restore Claiborne Temple will help to preserve this historic landmark and give it a new life as a hub for the community to learn about and engage in the civil rights movement. I believe our children should grow up learning about this pivotal time in our nation's history and reflect on the progress that we've made, along with the challenges that we still face. Again, thank you for this award, but thank you even more for all that you do to protect and preserve our nation's historic sites for generations to come.
I'm going to say this may be one of the best perks of being the president of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. This year's President's Award for National Leadership in Historic Preservation recognizes a place of national importance and pride to the American people. With this summer's 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 launch, NASA once again captured our country's imagination. The meticulous restoration of the Apollo Mission Control Center in Houston is a lasting legacy to the men and women who guided man to the moon.
In July of this year, NASA's Johnson Space Center completed a $5 million restoration that returned the Apollo Mission Control Center in Houston, Texas, to its former mid-century glory, just in time for the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing. The Mission Control Room is where NASA's flight control team made history, planning, training, and executing numerous internationally significant space missions. After the room was decommissioned in 1992, years of deterioration caused the National Park Service to list it as threatened. Because NASA is not able to accept earmarked public donations, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation assisted the management of funds raised through Kickstarter by Space Center Houston. These crowdsourced funds served as a partial match to a $3.5 million grant from the city of Webster in Texas. If it weren't for this unique funding model, made possible under a provision of the National Historic Preservation Act, the preservation of Apollo Mission Control Room may not have been achieved. The public can now experience free tours of the control center, in which every feature has been restored or replicated, down to the wallpaper, ceiling tiles, coffee cups, and ashtrays.
And here to accept this award are Sandra Tetley from the NASA Johnson Space Center, David Buchek of Stern and Buchek Architects, Adam Graves from Gravitate, and Sonia Youngberg of IUDA. The coveted Richard H. Driehaus Foundation National Preservation Awards are regarded as the pinnacle of achievement in historic preservation. I'm very pleased to welcome to the stage to present this year's recipients, Ann Lazar, Executive Director of the Richard H. Driehaus Foundation.
Good evening. It's truly a privilege to be here with everyone. And thank you to the National Trust for 3 decades of partnership and for continuing to be an unwavering steward for these National Preservation Awards. The Foundation joins you in celebrating the projects and people involved in these thoughtful and creative restorations. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Driehaus Foundation, it was established in 1992. During that time, it has supported organizations with over $100 million in 4 program areas, the largest of which supports the built environment and has a focus on historic preservation. Over the years, Richard and the Foundation have provided over $3 million of support to the National Trust and the Richard H. Driehaus Foundation National Preservation Awards. Tonight, we honor preservation excellence. This year's Driehaus Award recipients have undertaken projects with broad and lasting implications. They impact countless people across many disciplines. You will see an internationally significant work of architecture restored to its former glory, a multimodal bridge impacting the daily lives of over 100,000 commuters, and a former electrical power plant now serving as shared space for local universities. The work on these projects is an important investment in places and people. Older buildings tell us where we came from, both architecturally and socially. Preserving their beauty enhances our lives, our environments, and respects our heritage. Buildings that can be adaptively reused have untapped capital and are often critical anchors for psychological well-being. New studies regarding cognitive neuroscience applied to architectural design point to the importance of old buildings and how the mind perceives and responds to them. Growing evidence demonstrates that a sense of place matters to our emotional and physical well-being. This is a new and exciting frontier, and it has every potential to help all of you in the highly complex work that you undertake every day. Although he's unable to be here with us this evening, I bring with me from Chicago Richard's deep appreciation for that work and the admiration with which he regards it, as we congratulate each of this evening's awardees. And now, please turn your attention to the screen as we honor the 2019 Richard H. Driehaus Foundation National Preservation Award winners.
Completed in 1907, the 1,700-foot-long Henry Wadsworth Longfellow Bridge is considered the most important historic bridge in the city of Boston due to its outstanding architectural quality and prominent location over the Charles River. The bridge carries trains, cars, bikes, and pedestrians, handling 28,000 motor vehicles and close to 100,000 transit riders on an average day. As the busiest multimodal link between Boston and Cambridge, decades of deterioration and lack of maintenance left the bridge structurally deficient. In 2013, an extensive 5-year phased restoration plan was developed to address the bridge's structural and code deficiencies while retaining its historic character. With advice and oversight from 6 federal, state, and local historic agencies, the bridge was restored using the highest rehabilitation and restoration standards. The project used historic rivet construction methods on exterior steelwork visible to the public. The original steel buckle plates were restored or replicated to support the bridge deck, while structural repairs and replacements were made to the historic steel arches and spandrel columns. Cast iron railings were restored and the granite masonry cleaned. Original historic lighting fixtures were replicated and installed as part of a new functional and aesthetic lighting system. In response to public input, sidewalks were widened and protected bicycle lanes were installed to enhance safety. The bridge was reconnected to its original riverfront setting through thoughtful landscaping. And all this work was done while the bridge remained in active daily use. This successful $305 million infrastructure project serves as a national model, demonstrating how a 100-year-old bridge can be restored to comply to modern codes while also preserving its distinct historic character and architectural integrity.
Here to accept this award is Miguel Rosales from Rosales & Partners and Brian Olp from STV Incorporated.
Well, on behalf of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the cities of Cambridge and Boston, we are very grateful to receive this honor. The bridge was abandoned for many years, and it was because of lack of restoration. And finally, it was restored. And I have to tell you that if you ever come to Boston, you should cross it. It has beautiful views. new lighting, and it's a very exciting crossing between the two cities. This work could not have been possible before we had the support from the Department of Transportation. The Massachusetts Department of Transportation was very important, and they were the leadership in this project, and also our engineers, STB, and the contractors, Weiskamp Consigli. The project was rather complicated, but I think the results speak for themselves, and this restoration has given new life, new strength, and new purpose to the bridge. Thank you very much.
Unity Temple, home of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Oak Park, Illinois, is one of Frank Lloyd Wright's most famous works. Wright, who was raised in a Unitarian family, envisioned a radically designed religious space with a monochromatic, poured-in-place concrete exterior and a light-filled interior. After years of deterioration, the National Historic Landmark was named to both Landmark Illinois and the National Trust for Historic Preservation's endangered lists. The Unity Temple Restoration Foundation secured needed funding from the Alphawood Foundation, the congregation, and private donors, making a 3-year, $25 million restoration possible. Completed in 1908, Wright referred to this pioneering work of early modern architecture as his little jewel box. Fittingly, a major part of the restoration focused on the building's art glass. The glass pieces were cataloged, crated, and shipped off-site for restoration. In addition, the team from Harbo Architects spent nearly a year developing innovative techniques to repair cracks in the building's plaster interior and concrete exterior. The incorporation of 9 geothermal heating and cooling wells provided the temple with air conditioning for the first time in its history, and ADA upgrades and the addition of a catering kitchen helped the congregation more fully utilize the building. Unity Temple reopened for services in June of 2017, and the building once again provides a warm welcome to parishioners, community members, and Frank Lloyd Wright fans from around the world. In July of 2019, Unity Temple was named one of the 8 key works by Wright to become a UNESCO World Heritage Site, raising the site to the same international status as Machu Picchu, the Pyramids of Giza, and the Statue of Liberty.
Here to accept this award are Mark Kasperzik from Harbo Architects, Jack Trivia from Berglund Construction, and Brad White from the Alphawood Foundation.
On behalf of the entire restoration team, thank you to the Richard H. Driehaus Foundation and to the National Trust for Historic Preservation. But also, I would be remiss if I didn't thank the entire project team, a small portion of which are here today, and especially to Gunny Harbo, who made this virtually a life's project. 2019 proved to be no less important for Unity Temple than when the building was completed in 1908 or when the restoration was completed in 2017. In July, Unity Temple, along with 7 other Wright buildings across the United States, as you already heard, was inscribed as a World Heritage Site. This is an acknowledgement of the importance of the building to the architectural and cultural heritage of the world. Wright loved Unity Temple and referred to it many times as his gift to modern architecture. Many historic preservation projects involve the rehabilitation and restoration of a building for a different use. Hundreds, probably thousands of buildings have been converted to apartments, hotels, and office buildings. But here, we have a building that has been restored for its historic use, a church, and the congregation is the same congregation that built the church. As Wright indicated, it is the living spirit that builds. Unity Temple would not be complete without its congregation, the supporters of cultural heritage, its surrounding community, and of course the project team. In the words of Landmarks Illinois, people saving places for people. Thank you very much.
South Street Landing, a former power plant that serviced a large portion of Providence, Rhode Island, was built in phases between 1912 and 1952. Located along the Providence River, South Street Landing sits within the Jewelry District, a neighborhood known for its history as a costume jewelry manufacturing hub. The plant was decommissioned in 1995, and early attempts to reuse the site failed. After sitting shuttered for 17 years, Boston-based developer CV Properties teamed up with Brown University, Rhode Island College, and the University of Rhode Island to develop a shared vision for the plant. The project sought to retain the historic elements of the brick classical revival structure while reimagining its function and jump-starting the local economy. Completed in 2017 with the help of federal, state, and local incentives, the property was transformed into more than 305,000 square feet of adapted shared space. Rhode Island College and the University of Rhode Island joined together to create a state-of-the-art nursing education center, which includes technologically advanced simulation and training systems, complete with lifelike robotic mannequins. The remaining space is used by Brown University for administrative offices. The redevelopment of South Street Landing, part of a recently designated 125-acre riverfront area, has spurred investments in the surrounding neighborhood. This emerging innovation and design district is now experiencing an economic revival, powered by this electrifying preservation success.
Here to accept this award are Richard Galvin from CV Properties, Kristen Valenti from Choi Kobus Architects, and Bill McRosty of McRosty Historic Advisors.
Thank you, Ann, and thanks to the Driehaus Foundation and the National Trust for Historic Preservation for this really fantastic award. Sitting up here, listening to the summaries in the other projects, you know, we are really in stout company with some of these amazing projects, and it's very humbling for sure. You know, listening to Paul Edmondson yesterday, he made two references to themes, key themes in preservation, partnerships and innovation. And everyone in this room knows that these projects cannot be done with a huge group of partners to make it happen. Obviously, the design team, led by Choi Kobus and Bill McCrosty's expertise, Gilbane Construction. You heard about the universities, the state of Rhode Island, National Grid, our finance partners from Bank of America and Wexford Science and Technology. They all came together to help pull this off, and it was a great feat. And innovation, you know, there's nothing more, you know, indicative of the power of preservation than taking a building that was built in 1912 to power early 20th century innovation and turn it into a building that powers early 21st century innovation. That is the power of preservation, and we're all better off for it. I want to conclude by making a dedication. My longtime friend and partner, Tom Niles, whose entire life focus was finishing this project, died suddenly 3 months before its completion. His intense passion, focus, integrity, attention to detail remind us all how important those features are in getting historic preservation done, and I dedicate this award to him in his memory. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Congratulations again to all of the recipients of the 2019 National Preservation Awards. On behalf of the Board of Trustees, I now have the privilege of presenting the National Trust's highest honor, the Louise DuPont Crowninshield Award for superlative achievement in the field of historic preservation. This year we honor a woman whose prescient work is as important today as when she entered the field 30 years ago. Ruth Abram was at the forefront of telling the full American story when she founded the Lower East Side Tenement Museum in New York City in 1988. Her work at the museum was a model for telling the story of everyday Americans who were instrumental in building our nation. Her approach was aimed at fostering empathy by asking people to see the immigrant experience through the eyes of their ancestors. As many of you in the audience know, running a historic site can be more than a full-time job. Impressively, Abrams found the time to expand on her work by helping to establish the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience, a worldwide network of sites that preserve places associated with difficult histories. Today, both organizations continue to thrive, and Ruth continues to tackle new and challenging preservation work.
A lifelong advocate for social progress, Ruth Abrams started her career advocating for women's and civil rights in the 1970s. These experiences led her to consider the relationship between history and social change. In the 1980s, Abrams began to examine the history of immigration and its relevance to modern issues, and the idea of a museum dedicated to the immigrant experience was born. In 1988, Abrams and her friend Anita Jacobson discovered a largely untouched tenement at 97 Orchard Street in New York City's Lower East Side. The building had been boarded up for 50 years, offering an authentic look at tenement life from the 1840s through the 1930s. Aware that they had struck gold, the two formed a relationship with the owners and co-founded the Lower East Side Tenement Museum. The Revolutionary Museum preserves and interprets a pair of 19th century tenement buildings. The second, located at 103 Orchard Street. The museum uses these buildings as a tool for addressing contemporary issues by telling the uniquely American stories of immigrants, migrants, refugees, and working-class peoples in the context of the places they live. Throughout her 20-year tenure as president of the museum, Abrams focused on fostering empathy by inviting visitors to see America through the eyes of their immigrant ancestors. The museum works with local community members to share these stories, using the neighborhood as a backdrop. Abrams also led efforts to create a New York City landmark historic district in the Lower East Side, and pioneered the use of online digital tools such as the Immigrant Heritage Trail to help preserve the historic fabric of the neighborhood. In 1999, Abrams' work in bridging history and activism became transnational when she organized, along with 8 other leaders from around the world, the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience. Now encompassing sites in nearly 70 countries, the group leads the only global movement dedicated to spaces that remember and preserve the most traumatic memories, while encouraging their visitors to make connections between the past and related contemporary human rights issues. After her retirement from both organizations, Abrams moved to New Lebanon, New York. In 2014, she founded Behold, New Lebanon, a living museum of contemporary rural American life that focused on cultural tourism. Ruth is now embarking on what she describes as her last big project, restoring the Promised Land plantation in Georgia to interpret the lives of the rural immigrants and migrants who settled there. Abrams' paradigm-shifting leadership has directly inspired countless organizations and institutions to radically expand cultural and interpretive concepts at historic sites around the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in congratulating this year's Louise DuPont Crowninshield recipient, Ruth Abrams.
Thank you all so much. Can you hear me? Yeah. Chairman Whalen, members of the Board of Trustees, Executive Director Edmondson, trust members, staff, and friends, before you put me on the clock for my allotted 5 minutes, I'd like to introduce 3 of my colleagues represented in this film. Kindly hold your applause until all are standing. Liz Silks, director of the Coalition of Sites of Conscience, helps hundreds of sites around the world to demonstrate the relevance of their history today. Mark Patterson and Sarah Barlow from Gwinnett County, Georgia, have begun to uncover the multifaceted history of the Promised Land Plantation established by Irish immigrant Thomas Maguire, my great-great-great-grandfather. They plan to interpret the Maguires, the men and women and children they enslaved, and the Livesys, an African-American family which bought the plantation house in 1920 and lived there until recently. Please welcome them. And as one of you just said, people really need support in order to make things happen. And my support is sitting in the front row. Herb Teitelbaum, our daughter Anna Kay, is my husband of 52 years, our daughter Anna Kay, our son Noah Teitelbaum, 2 of our grandchildren, Jonah and Lily Mae Teitelbaum, and the other grandmother and my friend since college, Lorna Rhodes. Please stand up. Thank you. Friends, Koali Kamara, history teacher, history keeper, storyteller from Sierra Leone asked, "What is the use of telling a story if it doesn't help people transcend?" In the South, where I grew up, not one woman in my family's wide circle of friends was what was then referred to as a career woman. It was clear that my fantasy to be a civil rights advocate like my father was just that, a dream. And then one day I stumbled upon the autobiography of Jane Addams, founder of Chicago's Hull House. Transfixed by the heroic story of this woman from a background much like mine, I reached up my hand to Jane Addams and let her lift me up into the wider world. Such is the power of history, that it can offer role models that may not otherwise be available. If you doubt the power of history, consider the lengths to which governments go to alter or deny it. Today in Guatemala, teachers are not allowed to speak about their 36-year-old conflict that left over 200,000 dead and 40,000 disappeared. In Russia, Putin shut down the Gulag Museum, the first Stalinist labor camp converted to an historic site, because it told the truth about Russia's repressive history and invited visitors to consider the shape and signs of encroaching totalitarianism. At home, the full measure of the brutality of slavery and its lasting impact throughout our nation are omitted from textbooks, while plantation tours too often refer to enslaved people as servants, if at all. In 1987, Nelson Mandela organized an unprecedented meeting of prominent Afrikaners and top leaders of the ANC at the Slave House at Gorée Island in Senegal. The meeting at this World Heritage Site proved to be the turning point in the struggle against apartheid. Nelson Mandela later confided that the haunting sight of the African slave trade served as one of the keys that unlocked the door to a new communication and making his release and everything else possible. Such is the power of historic sites that, when fully exploited, can help unlock the doors to our future. When historians David Thalen and Roy Rosenzweig conducted the first national survey to uncover the reasons why Americans hated history, they found, to their great surprise, that Americans loved history, just not the dry facts and dates which passes for it in all too many classrooms. Further, they discovered that Americans trust historic sites and history museums as much as they trust their grandmothers. It's a great waste not to make use of the inherent power of historic sites and history museums, but it is not enough to simply preserve and interpret history, not if we want to unlock the full measure of its power, not if we want to serve the public well. For that, as Thalen and Rosenzweig concluded, Americans want history which actively assists them in making connections between the past and the present, a history which can be used to answer pressing current-day questions. They also discovered that an interest in history cut across lines of income, education, and skin color. Drawing on years of research, Martha McCoy and Patrick Scully of Everyday Democracy, which promotes public dialogue, concluded that people participate in public life because they want to be part of a community, to have a voice, to connect with all kinds of people, and to make progress on issues that are important to them. Our sites are well positioned to help the public attain its quest for community with diverse people. But none of this will happen if the tours and programs at our historic sites do not move visitors to think and invite frank discussion. It only happens when visitors are so engaged by a story, even a complex one, that they want and are able to share it afterwards. To become a storytelling site, we offer the historic facts and context to scriptwriters, poets, novelists, biographers, dramatists, and professional storytellers. We test the final drafts with visitors of all stripes, invited to mirror the diverse audiences we need. We interview them in person, asking, what did you like and not like? What was unclear? What does it make you think about your own life and times? What more would you have wanted to know? What will you remember? Where does this approach leave architecture, decor, and furnishings in historic sites? Just as in award-winning plays and movies, they serve as critical and telltale backdrops, as they once did to the human stories which unfolded within their walls. That human story is not always flattering. So what? Just as we ourselves are flawed, so are our heroes and heroines. A tour which whitewashes the historic characters is less believable, less relatable to ourselves, and therefore less compelling. What's the role of technology? If the technology separates people and discourages visitors from talking to one another, if it substitutes for a chance to speak with museum representatives knowledgeable and caring about the history, that technology has no place. I am deeply honored to receive this award, for it suggests that one day, with the Trust's vital participation, all over this country and beyond, historic sites and museums will fully exploit the power of history, becoming important locations for honest dialogue on the issues raised by the history of our sites, which remain relevant to our lives. In this way, my friends, we will respond to Kawali Kamara's challenge and help our visitors transcend. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate these remarkable people and projects. And thank you once again to the Richard H. Driehaus Foundation for your support of this wonderful program. Finally, thank you to all the staff who helped put tonight's ceremony together. We hope that these, yes, thank you. We hope that these stories inspired you, and we encourage you to nominate deserving people and projects from your community for next year's awards. We will begin accepting nominations for the 2020 National Preservation Awards on December 1st. But now, please join us in toasting all tonight's award recipients at a reception right outside these doors. Thank you, and good night.